The reality is negative emotions are uncomfortable.
Right.
But emotions give us vital information about our safety, our needs, our hurts, and how our interactions with others and the world affects us. Difficult emotions call our attention to unresolved issues. Unresolved emotions and the issues connected to them are always going to come back to the forefront. And usually it's in some kind of disruptive, sometimes even destructive ways. Welcome to the Blended Family Breakthrough Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike and Kim.
We believe in a world where blended families can experience a future full of hope, connection, and peace.
That's why we offer tools, strategies, and guidance that move you from a place of confusion and conflict to experiencing a life of confidence and connection.
We're so glad you're joining us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations as we cover everything from romance to parenting, and yes, even dealing with that difficult ex.
So if you're ready to experience breakthrough in your blended family, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hi there, welcome, and thanks for choosing to join us today. We are so grateful for you. Hey, just a quick note that if you haven't started following us on social yet, it's time to start.
Yeah.
You can follow Blended Family Breakthrough on Facebook or Instagram. Plus, we've just started showing up over on YouTube as well. So make sure you subscribe over there.
Yeah.
Okay, this week is going to be a little different here on the show. We're going to be sharing a 5-step process for helping kids when they're dealing with difficult emotions. But we're going to trickle those steps out over the next few days. So be sure that you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening, and keep an eye out for a little bit shorter episode to drop every day over the next several days. So we're going to laser focus on 1 or 2 steps at a time, and we encourage you to really stick with us this week.
Absolutely. Last week, we focused on effectively shifting or transitioning your couple relationship to become the foundational relationship of your home, which can be complex. And this transition is one where many blended couples tend to make some easy wrong turns, which can have a negative impact on the step relationships.
Yep.
And of course, what makes this transition so hard is that the process tends to create some emotional reactions in our kids who will inevitably feel challenged by all the changes taking place. No matter how well we manage the variety of transition that comes with blending, most kids are going to struggle with some emotional ups and downs along the way.
Right out of the gate. They're having to accept and make room for a new step-parent and possibly some new step-siblings as well. And not just room in their physical space and all that entails, but also room in their hearts.
Right. And they're faced with learning to share their biological parent whose time, attention, and affections are expanding outward to these newcomers. And from the child's perspective, that bio parent is kind of turning away from them.
Yeah.
It can be tough. They're realizing that their parents' priorities are shifting away from the old established foundation that was built during those single parent years towards something new, something unknown and possibly scary and upsetting for them.
Yeah, you might have heard us say this before, but every blended family is formed out of loss. There was some kind of separation that happened, possibly a divorce or a death of a parent. So kids in a blended family have already experienced more than their fair share of loss, grief, and unwanted change, which is going to stir up some ongoing waves of emotional pain. And then when their parent remarries or even starts seriously dating, there's more change and ambiguity to navigate and more difficult emotions that are most likely to emerge.
Right. We've talked quite a bit about loss and grief before here on the show and how that impacts a blended family's integration. Seemingly simple family situations can easily lead to outbursts of anger, resistance, and pushback, withdrawal, or ongoing resentment from kids. And at the root of it all is loss. Now, if you've missed some of our previous discussions about that, you might want to check out episode 132 called How Does Loss and Grief Impact Blended Family Integration? That episode will give you some helpful guidance around how to move forward as a family together with what Ron Deal calls a shared grief journey. This kind of understanding and empathy will strengthen bonds and help the whole family to better navigate all the complexities of blended family life. But the reality is, when kids experience loss and other distressing situations in life, they'll also experience difficult emotions.
So what we want to do is equip you with a step-by-step framework to help your kids and your stepkids. Much of the underlying pain that kids experience and they may not be fully aware of and probably won't even have the maturity to articulate.
Right.
And you might be scratching your head wondering what the heck is going on when you're faced with some misbehavior that often goes hand in hand with painful emotions.
Right.
So we're going to share how you can come alongside your kids and your stepkids to help them navigate those tough emotions. This is a parenting skill anyone can learn and continually grow in. John Gottman calls it emotion coaching. Now, I know. We've talked a lot about emotion coaching in all kinds of different settings here on the show, in our membership community, in private coaching sessions. Maybe you're about to check out thinking, yeah, Mike and Kim, I've heard this all before. Well, I really want to encourage you to hang on with us for two reasons. First, I love how Samuel Johnson says people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. Now, I don't know about you, but that's really true for me. I know a lot of stuff, but I really need help being reminded to actually put it into action. Which leads me to the second reason that I challenge you to hang in here with us. It's because we've talked a lot about emotion coaching, but over the next few days, we're going to try to really lay out the 5 steps in a way that's going to help you put it into action.
We're even going to use a personal example that I think every person that's listening can relate to.
Yeah, that's right. And chances are you've heard about emotion coaching, but you might not actually be able to articulate what the steps are and how to do them. So keep listening and keep tuning in this week.
That's right. As I was learning to become an emotion coaching parent, I had to be reminded over and over and over. It wasn't just like, oh, I read the book and I've got it and I'm able to implement what I learned right out of the gate. Right. Oh, no. I really had to immerse myself in these concepts over a period of time before I was able to imperfectly master all this, right?
That's right.
And the truth is, the skill of emotion coaching is something we all need in our parental toolbox. It's essential. So we're going to map out the 5 steps of emotion coaching, which we've taken straight from one of our favorite parenting books by John Gottman called How to Raise an Emotionally Intelligent Child. That's
right. And we know from our personal experience with our own kids how impactful emotion coaching can be. The 5 steps that we're going to be covering are pretty simple. But we realize that simple isn't always easy. So along the way, we're going to also explore some common challenges that we face when it comes to effectively emotion coaching our kids. And we'll offer a real life example and some tips that can help you in those challenging moments when your child or stepchild seems to be having a hard time. So, honey, let's dive into step 1.
All right. The first step is being aware of your child's emotion. Kids, like all of us, have reasons for the emotions they experience. Often, as the adults, when we see our child getting angry or upset over an issue that seems small or inconsequential to us, we might be tempted to dismiss the child or just expect them to just get over it. But just because we believe it's a minor thing, that doesn't mean that it's minor to our child.
That's right. Yeah.
To help us become more aware, we need to be willing to look at the bigger picture of what might be going on inside our child.
Yeah. Speaker Mark Gregston says, behavior is the visible expression of invisible issues. It's the warning light on the dashboard.
I love that.
That's actually true of us as adults as well. Yes. So in order to gain awareness of your child's emotions, which is step 1, you're going to need to pay attention to their behaviors, even the subtle ones. Now, some kids have big, loud behaviors when they're emotionally activated. Those are pretty easy to spot. But other kids might tend to isolate themselves or become unusually quiet or maybe exhibit some physical signs like, hanging their head down low or avoiding eye contact, those kinds of things.
Yeah, even tummy aches can be an indication.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
For today's discussion, we thought we'd use an example that focuses on something that's outside blended family dynamics as we work through these steps.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think we tend to overdiagnose our kids' struggles, right? We kind of just assume that all of it's rooted in the blended family dynamics.
Yep.
But that's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, kids in blended families will face emotional tension due to the loss and grief that they've experienced. That's absolutely true, like I said before. But they'll face other difficult, emotionally charged situations in other areas of life as well.
Right.
Kids growing up in first families, they need to be emotionally coached too.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, John Gottman's book is for every parent.
Yeah.
This is not centered on blended families. However, there is a really insightful chapter called Marriage, Divorce, and Your Child's Emotional Health.
Mm-hmm.
And that one really focuses on how conflict in the home impacts children.
Right.
But today, I think it's helpful to open up our perspective a bit so that we can thoughtfully consider all of our children's experiences in life, not just the ones that are associated with blending.
Yeah, I totally agree. And of course, you can apply the steps of emotion coaching to any challenge that your kids might be facing. Mm-hmm. And in fact, back in episode 71 called How to Help Your Kids Cope with Painful Holiday Disappointment, we used an example of Annika's struggle with transitioning from her dad's house to our home on Christmas Day, which we had to do every single year, right? And that's a common pain point for kids that are living in blended dynamics. Now, we didn't do nearly as deep of a dive on these 5 steps there. We just kind of touched on them. So you can certainly go back, though, and check that out if you want another example around those kinds of dynamics. But for this week's example, it's another common struggle, which is tension between siblings.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, you might not be able to relate to that. I know your kids are angels to each other. Yes, I get it. But we've struggled with it in our home. Yeah, we've heard some stories about people who've even had struggle between step siblings.
Right, of course. Yeah. So let's share about an incident that happened between our 2 mutual children, Phoebe and Jacob, who both happened to be part of a unicycle club throughout most of their elementary and their middle school years.
That's right. She said unicycle club. I actually think it's kind of cool that our kids can ride a unicycle, probably because I can't do it. Yeah.
So one day I showed up a little early to pick the kids up from unicycle practice, and I went into the gym just to watch the last few minutes. It didn't take long for me to notice that there was a bit of an angsty vibe with my kids. Phoebe, who usually has a huge, joyful smile on her face, she was downcast and sullen. It was really odd. There was no smile at all. And Jacob was pedaling his unicycle a bit aggressively. And when we got to the car, he just threw his unicycle in with this big huff of frustration. So none of this was what I normally see when I pick them up. On the drive home, they were both really quiet. They were closed off, and it was clear they didn't want to answer any of my questions about how practice went. I also noticed their body language, arms crossed, and they were turned sharply away from each other. Again, this is unusual. When Jacob entered the house, he stomped up the stairs and under his breath said something along the lines of, such a jerk.
Okay. So this is the first step, and it's really just all about awareness.
Right.
You're on the lookout for anything that might seem uncharacteristic. Usually our kids were happy when you pick them up from practice. They tend to enjoy sharing what they did and all that happened that day. But on this particular day, it was pretty obvious to you, but you had to be aware. You had to be paying attention that, hey, something's not quite right with the kids emotionally. We're so excited to let you know about something brand new we've created just for you.
We've realized that with so many episodes available here on the show, it might feel a bit overwhelming to find the topics that matter most to you. That's why we've created a simple tool for you to receive a personalized playlist focused on your current struggle or your biggest challenge.
That's right. It's called the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz. You'll answer just a few questions, and based on your responses, we'll email you a curated custom playlist of episodes that are specific to you.
This simple quiz will direct you to the most impactful episodes that pertain to you personally and keep you on track in your journey of discovery, learning, and growth. So, scroll all the way to the bottom of the show notes for this episode and click the link to take the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz today.
Okay, let's get back to the discussion.
Exactly. And I need to share with you that this incident took place after years of me learning and practicing the tool of emotion coaching, especially with Annika, who really was struggling with blended family dynamics.
Right.
So I just want to say up front that I'm not trying to toot my own horn here because honestly, there were many times over the years that I didn't have a clue when something was up with my kids emotionally. I just kind of put on the blinders.
Sure.
But because I'd taken these intentional steps to learn, to grow, and to practice this skill, at the time of the unicycle incident, I was ready to roll.
Yeah. Just like with every parenting skill, knowledge just changes your thinking, but it's practice that actually changes your life.
Exactly. And, it can change our kids' lives too.
That's right. That's right. So step one is actually really simple. Just be aware. Here's Gottman's description of emotional awareness. It simply means that you recognize when you're feeling an emotion, you can identify your feeling, and you're sensitive to the presence of emotions in other people. This is what we want not only for our kids in the long run, but for ourselves as well. It's so important. Gottman says that parents who are aware of their own emotions can use their sensitivity to tune into their children's feelings, no matter how subtle or intense. So this incident you're describing was a little more intense. But being a sensitive, emotionally aware person, however, doesn't necessarily mean that you'll always find your child's feelings easy to understand. Okay? Kids often express their emotions indirectly and in ways that adults find puzzling. But if we listen carefully with open hearts, we can often decode messages that children are unconsciously hiding in their interactions, in their play, or in everyday behavior.
Right.
So that's step one, being aware of your child's emotions, which Gottman says is easier if you're aware of your own emotions. Okay. So let's go on to step two, honey.
Great. So step two is recognizing the emotion as an opportunity for intimacy and teaching. Gottman says, whether the crisis is a broken balloon, a failing math grade, or the betrayal of a friend, such negative experiences can serve as superb opportunities to empathize, to build intimacy with our children, and to teach them ways to handle their own emotions.
That's so good. And the challenge here is that when our children are experiencing a negative emotion, it can kick off an emotional reaction inside of us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So in order to be a safe, secure place for our kids to process through their emotions, we're going to need to set our own emotions aside while we focus on them just for a time.
Yeah.
Now, we get it. None of us wants to see our kids hurting, and sometimes our reaction to their struggle is actually rooted in our own hurts or histories and our hang-ups. Gottman's identified 4 different parenting reactions that we might tend to lean into, and they're really important for us to understand. Because like he said, if we want to be aware for the first step, we got to figure out our own emotions as well. Yeah. So let's just examine these 4 different reactions that a lot of us tend to have.
So some of us tend to be what Gottman calls the dismissing parent. We do whatever we can to minimize the child's feelings or distract them from negative emotion. The dismissing parent might believe that their child's emotions are irrational and therefore they don't count. This parent might feel uncomfortable, fearful, anxious, guilty, annoyed, manipulated, hurt, or overwhelmed by their child's emotions. Because of all this, they tend to focus more on just trying to get their child over the emotion rather than exploring the meaning of the emotion itself.
Wow.
Yeah. So if I use the unicycle situation with Phoebe and Jacob, and I reacted as a dismissing parent, let's just say, I might have said something like, "Don't be grumpy. I'll take you to get some ice cream." Or I'd make some at least statements. At least you got your big performance this weekend to look forward to. At least you can watch your favorite show when you get home.
I think when we read these titles, nobody wants to admit I'm a dismissing parent.
Right.
But as you describe that, I'm like, oh, man, I've really been a dismissing
me
parent
too,
over
of
the
course.
years. Yeah. There's another one, though, that sometimes we might lean toward what Gottman calls the disapproving parent. And when we slip into this reaction, we might think that negative emotions are unproductive, unacceptable, or just a waste of time. We might internally judge or outwardly criticize our child's emotional expression and swiftly impose consequences, right? So the disapproving parent is usually more concerned with getting the child to obey than the child's emotional well-being. Now, as a step parent, I just want to say that's an area where I really struggled, especially with Annika, because I viewed her through the lens of responsibility first, and I did want her to obey. I wanted compliance.
Right.
So I don't know that I was always slipping into like disapproving parent, but with Annika, I really struggled to stay out of that mindset.
Yeah. So had I responded as a disapproving parent around this unicycle incident, I might have said something like, "Phoebe, stop sulking. Go pull yourself together. Jacob, it's not okay to throw your unicycle around like that. You're going to pay for the damages."
Yep, that's right. It's tough. I know I've responded that way many times.
Yeah, the disapproving parent is much more stern.
Yeah. Now, the third way that some of us can react is more the laissez-faire parent. And this is when we fall victim to the limiting belief that there's little that we can do about negative emotions other than just simply ride them out. We just got to wait it out, grit our teeth, right? This parent doesn't really spend time teaching or talking to the child about emotions. And a lot of times they tend to avoid setting healthy limits or working on problem solving with the child as well.
Right. As a laissez-faire parent, I might have done nothing or just pretended like my kids weren't struggling with any difficult emotions on that drive home. I might have allowed them to express their emotions, but I wouldn't really engage or try to help them work through it.
Yeah. So we don't want to be a dismissing parent or a disapproving parent or that laissez-faire parent. What we really want to shoot for is to be the emotion coaching parent. And step 2, recognizing this emotion as an opportunity for intimacy and teaching, it's where we kind of make or break our ability to effectively emotion coach our child. It really has to do with our own willingness to respond rather than react. And again, that means we're going to need to set our own emotions aside just for a time in order to offer some empathetic coaching responses to our hurting child. When you offer your child empathy and you help them learn how to cope with these negative feelings, you're actually building bridges of loyalty and affection with them. Emotional interactions between a parent and a child are important, and they make a really significant difference in the child's long-term success and happiness.
So as an emotion coaching parent, which I was at the time, I took a moment to have a little conversation with myself that sounded something like this. Phoebe and Jacob are struggling right now, and I am capable of coaching them through whatever might be going on. This is an opportunity to build connection and to teach my kids how to manage challenging situations and tough emotions.
That's right. The reality is negative emotions are uncomfortable.
Right.
But as human beings, emotions give us vital information about our safety, our needs, our hurts, and how our interactions with others and the world affects us.
Right.
Difficult emotions call our attention to unresolved issues. The more we try to distract or repress or ignore those feelings, the more the unpleasantness accumulates below the surface.
Right.
Difficult emotions are not turned off by distraction or apathy. Those are just coping mechanisms, and often they just push the pain away from conscious awareness, but it's temporary. Unresolved emotions and the issues connected to them are always going to come back to the forefront, and usually it's in some kind of disruptive, sometimes even destructive ways.
So again, we want to set our sights on becoming parents and step-parents who choose to emotion coach our kids and not fall into those other categories of dismissive, disapproving, or laissez-faire. And by the way, early on in our parenting journey, we both fell into these. Mm-hmm. I was a mom who constantly yelled at my kids to force compliance when they struggled. But eventually we learned that these approaches will inevitably create even more pain for our kids who may come to believe their emotions are bad or inappropriate or not valid.
Yeah.
Kids might think there's something inherently wrong with them because of the way they feel. They might think we don't care about what they're experiencing and feel very alone in their pain. And we certainly don't want that for our kids.
That's right. Okay. So step 1 is just being aware of your child's emotions, paying attention. Step 2 is recognizing that emotion as an opportunity to build intimacy and to teach them. Mm-hmm. And by the way, you might consider taking the Gottman assessment to discover your own parenting reactions. Yeah. So we've been talking about these reactions right now. Mm-hmm. He has an assessment out there, and we're going to link to it in the show notes. Yep. This is a self-reflection opportunity, and self-reflection is the name of the game here. Okay, so you may go check out that link in the show notes.
Yes, it's so helpful to gain that awareness around your own proclivities because we often tend to handle our kids' emotions in the same way our parents handled our emotions when we were kids. Yeah. And this might be a time to reflect on how you might have been impacted and what you'd like to do differently with your own kids.
Absolutely. We've worked hard to break some unhealthy cycles that we experienced growing up. Mm-hmm. You know, my dad and stepmom leaned more toward the disapproving style, and it didn't feel safe for me to express my negative emotions. And I kind of leaned into that as well as a parent sometimes. Mm-hmm. Now, honey, your parents leaned a little bit more toward dismissive, I think. Is that right?
Yes, they were kind of a mix of dismissive and laissez-faire. As a result, I felt misunderstood most of the time and unheard. And I still feel that way with my family of origin most of the time. So steps 1 and 2 are really about us.
Yeah.
Reflecting and noticing our own reactions to our kids' emotional struggles. And if we want to become emotion coaching parents, these 2 steps are critical.
For sure. Okay. So we want to encourage you to be really aware of what might be going on with your child or your stepchild. That's step 1. And then notice your own reaction if they're having a difficult emotion. Right. So reflecting on your own tendency when your child or stepchild is struggling, that's step 2. So tomorrow, we're going to move on to step 3, but that's it for today.
Until tomorrow.